Built like a praying mantis and the size of a small car, the Ankheg is no joke. With the ability to spit acid to dissolve their opponents and a preference for ambushing their prey from underground burrows, these behemoth bugs are the bane of hunters, farmers and adventurers alike. Ahoy everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm Nazir North and this time in our Monster Manual breakdown we are looking at the Ankheg, a challenge rating 2 monstrosity which is essentially a gigantic man-eating insect. Now that thumbnail you've clicked on is not just bait, we are going to get deep into Ankheg tactics and you'll soon see how these creatures can easily take out a player character even when punching well above their weight in terms of challenge rating. While we're going to look at the base Ankheg first, we're also going to do a little bit of homebrewing in the second half of this video. So if you're interested in my take on a legendary form of the Ankheg, make sure you stick around until the end. Okay, let's kick things off by looking at what the Monster Manual tells us about the Ankheg. The Ankheg is a massive insectoid creature with many limbs and a mandible powerful enough to cut through a small tree. That's more than enough strength to snap bones and most types of armour. Although the creature's weight isn't specified in the Monster Manual, there is a taxidermied Ankheg in the Dungeon of the Mad Mage adventure, which is said to weigh around 600 pounds. So a living Ankheg would weigh a fair bit more than this because the stuffed version in that adventure is just filled with sawdust. So we are probably looking at a mature adult Ankheg that weighs upwards of half a ton, or around 450 kilograms. This means these are big, tough creatures. Ankhegs can use their limbs to burrow, which the Monster Manual entry tells us is how they prefer to hunt. They move beneath the earth and then strike upwards, biting at their target, dissolving them with their digestive acids. The entry also tells us that the Ankheg gains some of its nutrition from the soil itself. Now, it doesn't specify if this is from roots, worms or algae, or maybe they somehow feed on the soil directly like a plant, but that is interesting to note. Despite this, however, the Ankhegs do need to supplement their diet with fresh meat. Note that this is fresh meat. They are hunters, not scavengers. Their preferred prey seems to be wild game and farmyard animals, although I'm sure they wouldn't say no to a nice tasty farmer in addition to the farmer's cow. Due to their acidic excretions and their incredibly powerful jaws, they probably eat their meals pretty quickly, with bones, clothes, maybe even armour all dissolved and digested, leaving very little behind. If you've ever seen a video of a praying mantis eat its prey, I imagine dinner time for the Ankheg would look something like that. Fair warning though, if you go searching for that on YouTube, it is pretty gross. As Ankhegs burrow through the ground, they leave partially collapsed tunnels behind them where the entry tells us you might find molted chitin. This implies that, like a snake or a lobster, Ankhegs shed their skin as they grow. Hatched Ankheg eggs. We probably could have guessed, but this confirms that they are egg-laying creatures. And coins or other items scattered during the creature's attack. Again, this confirms what we already expected. There isn't going to be much of a body left from whatever the Ankheg has eaten, only the remnants of things that have fallen off their body or out of their pockets during the battle. Alright, based on what we know so far, let's get one thing straight, as I think a lot of DMs have probably made this mistake in the past. The party are not going to come across an Ankheg wandering around in the woods or munching down on a dead cow in the middle of a farm, and they aren't going to see one charging at them across a wide open field. The whole point is, you don't see the Ankheg. The first time you know what is near is when it burrows up directly underneath your feet and bites you. A player character with a very high passive perception may get lucky and spot the subtle movements under the earth or hear the sounds of burrowing from below to give them an advance warning, but most of the time it is the Ankhegs who are going to surprise the party, not the other way around. They are, after all, ambush hunters. They know where you are before you know where they are. Now let's review their stat block. It's pretty small but dense. There is a fair amount of information to work with there on such a small block. It's large in size and it's a monstrosity. It has an okay armor class of 14, but interestingly only 11 when it's prone. This is very specific, and the Ankheg, as far as I can tell, is the only monster in the Monster Manual with this kind of AC reduction when it's knocked prone. What this likely represents is that their chitinous armor is mostly on their head and back, with a relatively soft or weak underside or belly. You can describe this to the players when they first encounter them, giving them an incentive to try and push the Ankhegs over. The Ankheg has 39 hit points on average, 30 feet of movement speed and a 10-foot burrow speed. This means that they can be 10 feet underground before launching their ambush to allow them to strike upwards and attack on that same turn. They have a relatively high strength score of 17, as we'd expect, and an okay dexterity and constitution. Their intelligence is just 1, putting them on par with other bug and insect type creatures, but their wisdom is 13. What this tells us is that they operate mainly on instinct rather than past knowledge. Essentially, they follow their biological programming rather than learning from their lived experience. The Ankheg then also has a charisma score of 6, which implies that they are capable of some basic communication with one another, maybe simple messages such as food this way or danger over here, even though they don't have any language. They have dark vision along with tremor sense. Tremor sense allows them to pinpoint the exact location of a creature that is moving around on the ground within 60 feet of them. I imagine this as the Ankhegs waiting motionless in their burrows beneath the surface, with their antennae pushed up into the earth above them. Given their sensitivity to movement, you might expect the Ankhegs to gravitate towards places with a heavy or high amount of footfall, like dirt roads or animal grazing spots. Somewhat disappointingly, their passive perception score is only 11, but unless a party is actively trying to sneak or walk without rhythm, then I'd rule that the Ankheg is probably going to be aware of their presence, especially if they walk over the spot directly above where the Ankheg is sitting below. Now, because of the tremor sense and their low intelligence, I think if multiple Ankhegs were waiting close to each other, as soon as one pounces and makes their move, those nearby would likely feel the vibrations and immediately head towards that source of movement. From the party's perspective, they would essentially see one Ankheg reach up out of the ground directly beneath them, shortly followed by a number of other Ankhegs popping out of the earth all within that 60 feet tremor sense range. And going back to that 1 intelligence, I don't think the Ankhegs would do this out of a coordinated pack hunting strategy. I think they're all just acting individually, each is hungry and they each want a meal. Back to the rest of the stat block, the Ankheg has no resistances or immunities or any special features or traits. It does however have 2 actions. It has a fairly strong bite attack which deals a decent amount of slashing damage plus some acid damage as well. But the key part here is that bite gets an auto grapple on a hit. If they get that hit, the Ankheg then has advantage on attacks against their grappled foe. It also has an acid spray, which is on a recharge roll of a 6, so they probably only get to use this once per combat encounter. The spray is a 30-foot line of acid with okay damage and still half damage on a successful save. Interestingly here though, the Ankheg doesn't have any resistance or immunity to acid itself. That means friendly fire is entirely possible. And like the real-life praying mantis, I don't think a hungry Ankheg would be above cannibalism. They would absolutely eat each other when times are tough. In terms of self-damage though, even though they don't have a resistance or immunity, I think we have to assume that the Ankheg's mouth and digestive tract or whatever gland is producing that acid is immune to acid itself, even if the rest of the Ankheg's body isn't. Okay then, given what we've learned so far, what might an Ankheg encounter look like? What are their tactics? First off, like we've already said, the Ankhegs will be lying in wait underground, waiting for a meal to walk into their lap. The party probably won't know where the Ankhegs are, although there may be nearby signs of the activity like disrupted earth or collapsed burrows. Nearby farmers or hunters are also likely to be aware of their presence, even if they don't know exactly where they are, as they'd probably warn the party about animals having gone missing in this area. Once the Ankheg sees its chance, it will strike upwards, probably on a surprised party member, making their first bite attack with advantage. I imagine this a little like a crocodile's death roll as they emerge from the water to strike their prey. The Ankheg, still partially underground, is viciously biting at their target with their huge mandibles, spitting and dribbling acid all around as they drag their meal downwards. Then, with their attention drawn towards the vibrations in the ground, the other Ankhegs lying in wait within 60 feet also emerge from the ground and begin dashing towards the disturbance, towards the party. Any Ankhegs who get within a 30-foot range will fire their acid spray as they run in. Now, the second round of initiative is where things get really deadly, and this is the part where I got my idea for the thumbnail from. Any Ankhegs who successfully grappled a party member are not going to stick around. They got what they came for. We know from the Monster Manual entry that what little remains of their meals are found below ground. So they immediately begin burrowing back into the earth as deep as they can go. Not only do they want to eat their meals safely away from other party members, they also want to avoid the other Ankhegs stealing their catch. So down they go. dashing to move as far down as they can move on their turn, probably intentionally moving diagonally if possible, giving them the best chance of their tunnel to collapse behind them, preventing others from following and also preventing their meal from wriggling away. Remember, the Ankheg doesn't have the tunneler feature that some other burrowing monsters do, like the purple worm for example. That means that they don't automatically leave a passage behind them that can be easily followed as they dig. Anyone trying to follow them or escape from them is going to have to dig their own way through. And as soon as they dig down and are out of line of sight, the players remaining on the surface will likely have no idea which way the Ankheg has gone. In terms of speed, pulling a grappled creature means you move at half your speed. So with a dash, the Ankheg can drag a medium human down by about 10 feet. However, if they grab a creature that is 2 sizes or more smaller than they are, so a small creature like a gnome or halfling, then their dash will take them down 20 feet. Either of those options could be a death sentence for a player character. Just think, graves are typically dug 4 to 6 feet down, and I can't imagine how difficult it would be to climb out of a grave, pushing through earth all while suffocating in pitch darkness, and you may not even know which way is up. And that's just 4 to 6 feet. Imagine being 10 or even 20 feet down. And Misty Step isn't going to save you from this one. Even though it can teleport you up to 30 feet, you still need to have a line of sight to where you want to go. The same goes for similar spells like Thunder Step, which also requires line of sight. You're probably looking at something like Dimension Door, a 4th level spell, to escape from a challenge rating 2 creature. At this point in the encounter, you potentially have 2 or 3 players fighting Ankhegs on the surface, which I'm guessing they will make relatively short work of. However, you might also have 1 or 2 party members 30 feet by now, or maybe more, underground, each in 1v1 battles with their own Ankheg. The Ankheg has advantage on attacks against the creatures they've taken, assuming they've maintained that grapple, and if the player doesn't have dark vision, all of their attacks back will have disadvantage as well. But let's assume the underground player wins their fight. They now have to deal with the issue of being trapped underground. While the Ankheg was moving with them and burrowing, creating a space for them to move through, they probably had enough air in that pocket to breathe. But as soon as the Ankheg stops burrowing, perhaps because it's being killed, the player would start suffocating. The rules do get a little murky here though, because there aren't any rules for player character digging speeds in combat in 5th edition. If you think about it logically, 6 seconds is absolutely not enough time to dig a hole big enough for you to move into even 5 feet. Especially if you're just using your bare hands and not a shovel or a spade. And even the Ankheg, a creature specialised in burrowing, only has a burrowing speed of 10 feet. So that things aren't completely impossible for the player, I'd probably rule that they could move 2.5 feet per round, and that would account for using both their action to dig and all of their movement to move into that new space that they've just dug out. I would rule, however, that they are still suffocating throughout that process. That is just how I would rule it though. We are a little outside of core rules here, so as a DM you'd have to use your own judgment if this situation came up. In terms of suffocation, in 5th edition a player can hold their breath for a number of minutes equal to 1 plus their con modifier, with a minimum of 30 seconds. So with a 2.5 digging speed, let's say, that's 25 feet per minute, which is quite generous on reflection, but let's forget about real world physics for the moment. That might be enough time to get them out of where they've been trapped underground, depending on how deep they are. But without magic or support from the surviving players on the surface, they may still struggle to get out before they run out of air. And just imagine the conundrum the party members on the surface might be faced with. They could have 2 players trapped underground in different places, and they may need to make that difficult choice of who to save, as they might not have the time to save them both, assuming they even know where they are. Before we move on to the next part of the video, just a few words of advice to Dungeon Masters, because these tactics can be really deadly. If we were playing a video game, I'd say this kind of strategy for the monsters to employ is even overpowered. Just remember that your job as the DM isn't to try and kill the players, it's to provide them with a sufficient level of challenge to make the world seem dangerous and to keep the game interesting. Just bear that in mind, you're not trying to beat the players. Okay, let's move on. We'll end this section on monster tactics with a very brief discussion on allies. As unintelligent hunting animals with food as their main priority, I don't think the Ankhegs would ally themselves with any other types of creatures. so most Ankheg encounters are probably going to be just X number of Ankhegs versus the party. Equally, they wouldn't make very good pets for other races like orcs or goblins, for example, as their acid spray and burrowing speed would just make them a nightmare to try and corral and contain. You may, however, see some symbiotic relationships arising, perhaps between Ankhegs and oozes, for example, where the oozes slide through the remains of the Ankheg burrows, slurping up any leftover scraps. But this isn't strictly an alliance, you might just have those two creature types occupying the same territory. Or you may have very smart foes like beholders luring Ankhegs to an area outside of their lair, maybe even feeding them on occasion to keep them around, acting as a sort of early warning system for intruders. And that is all we have for official 5e content on the Ankheg, one page in the monster manual with one stat block. There is a small encounter with them in the Princes of the Apocalypse adventure, but as far as I'm aware, there are no other official variants of the Ankheg in 5th edition. Let me know in the comments if you're aware of any. I've been searching my bookshelf and I couldn't find anything. This might leave you thinking, where do we go now? The video's not quite over. Well, this is where we're going to do a little bit of homebrewing. If you're not interested in homebrew monsters, fair enough, they are an optional part of the game, but if you are interested, you might want to stick around for this next part. In terms of design philosophy here, I've decided to take a different approach to the monster manual's take on the Ankheg, and imagined it more like a communal hive creature rather than a solo hunting and roaming creature, so more like an ant than a praying mantis. Based on that, I've created two variants, the Ankheg Alate and the Ankheg Queen. The Ankheg Alate is a slightly smaller variant which can fly. Their role in the hive is as scouts to watch for approaching threats. They are also young queens who may eventually form their own hive should they find a suitable location. They are built to be a little more dexterous than the basic Ankhegs, and they have hardened armour in certain places. I've essentially given them what is a slightly weaker version of the flyby trait to reflect this. They still have the bite attack, but instead of acid spray, I've given them a glue spray. This is a cone effect which doesn't deal damage but might pin creatures in place, making it even easier for the Ankhegs on the ground to catch their prey. Unlike the base Ankhegs, the Alates are more likely to fly down, try and grab a foe, and then fly back up to drop them, hoping the fall kills them. The second variant I've designed is the Ankheg Queen, which I've made into a legendary monster. This isn't a hunter or a scout, this monster is more of a plot hook, as you're going to have to go into an Ankheg hive to find it. As like a queen ant or a queen bee, it's probably never going to leave the hive. In combat, it's also going to be protected by more Ankhegs, probably a mix of the Alates and your regular Ankhegs. The queen itself is a matured version of the Ankheg Alate, although they have grown significantly in size and have completely lost the ability to fly. It's got improved stats across the board apart from dexterity, and I've given it immunity to fear, which I feel makes sense for a huge queen bug defending their home. Their bite attack is a lot stronger, and now they also have a claw attack they can use if a creature is already grappled in their jaws. I've combined the glue and acid spray effects to create an action which is a little similar to a dragon's breath weapon attack. Not only does it do damage and restrain creatures in place, but it also deals additional acid damage for every turn the players don't break out of that glue. They have a reaction to lash out with an attack when they watch one of their brood get killed. This is a sort of thematic mechanic where you can imagine many basic Ankhegs mindlessly rushing to their deaths to protect their queen, all the while the queen is getting madder and madder, lashing out at the invaders. The queen has some legendary actions, and fair warning, these are pretty brutal, use them with caution. There is a crunch, which is a bite attack with an auto crit if it hits on a grappled creature. It also has consume, which as the name implies lets the queen eat a dead creature, probably the one that it just crit, to regain some hit points. So from its actual turn in initiative order to these two legendary actions, it could potentially kill a party member in the first round of combat. So yeah, pretty dangerous. Now, I'm not always a fan of healing abilities on monsters, as they can sometimes unnecessarily prolong a fight, but given that this one isn't that likely to trigger, they might not get a kill on the party in the fight, I think it's okay in terms of balance. One other point to note there on that action though is I've ruled that the consumed body is completely destroyed by the queen's stomach acid, much like the disintegrate spell, so no revivify on that one. The last legendary action is one where it releases pheromones, agitating its nearby allies, granting them immunity to fear and multi-attack while the effect lasts, which is up to 1 minute or broken as per concentration spell rules. I was considering some lair actions as well, but this monster's already pretty stacked, so I've left it there for now. I'll leave a link in the description to Reddit where you can get a hold of these stat blocks if you want to use them in your campaign. So far in this series of videos, I've just stuck to official core rulebook monsters, but if you want to see some more homebrewed stuff as well, let me know in the comments. Last point I'll make before we finish up, some quick movie recommendations for inspiration on Ankhegs: Tremors, Eight-Legged Freaks, and Starship Troopers. I hope you've all enjoyed this one. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on future videos. And if you want to see more breakdowns like this from the Monster Manual, you can check out those cards on the end screen. Cheers everyone, I'll see you next time.